So what's being recorded right now is the gallery view, because it's not working well for me to go to a speaker view and be looking at myself. So if you don't want to be a part of this for anyone to look at, and of course I'm just sending it to our small group, just feel free to turn your camera off. And if you do that, then I will also make it so your name doesn't appear. So, good to see you, everybody. For those that weren't here earlier, both Tim and Doug expressed regrets this evening. Last week, we began talking about the fourth point of the five forces, or the five powers. And just to refresh, using them as given by Trelig Kabgun, which is a little different than the other five, but nonetheless, he calls them the power of aspiration, the power of habituation, the power of planting white seeds, the power of exposure, and the power of dedication. And all five of these practices can help us, as the actual title of the fourth point says, to utilize the practice in one's whole life. That these things, if paid attention to, can really make the practice a continual one, so that it's always there with us. The practice that brought some discussion last time was the fourth of these five forces or powers, which Trelig Kabgun calls the power of exposure. The other teachers use words such as reproach, revulsion, repudiation, and Alan Wallace even goes to abhorrence. It's our boy. And the question arose, it seems as if so much of the instruction is about acceptance and relaxing into things. This particular power seems to be at odds with that. Again, all the teachers say what we are reproaching here, or what we're experiencing perhaps revulsion toward, is the recurrent presence of unskillful means, the recurrent presence of perhaps critical, judgmental mind that's nattering on and on all the time, making comments about all the folks out there and how they need to be different than they are, and nattering on about us and how we're not so hot either and we need to be different too, self-critical, other critical. It may have to do with the the various appetites that might drag us around by the nose. that maybe we're tired of taking that second piece of cake when we don't really want to, or we know we shouldn't even though we do want to. Or it may have to do with things that could be more serious. The desire for a relationship with someone who has a spouse. And maybe there's a connection there, and maybe just one kiss would be okay. But that's not what happens. And sometimes these things can be very, very strong. And we have all, of course, given into them at times. And very often have later thought, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. Because after the fact, the feeling of being overly full, the feeling of having broken a trust of some kind, the feeling of having been unskillful in a way that has brought pain or suffering into our lives or those of others, it comes up, and we're left with an awareness of that was not a good thing to do, and sometimes feelings of sometimes guilt, sometimes remorse, sometimes shame in some of our actions. So what all these teachers are talking about is, do you get to the point where you say, man, I've had enough. I've just had enough. I don't want to keep doing this. This pattern is destructive. It causes suffering, and I'm tired of it. So these words of, yuck, the sort of revulsion that can arise when this is just washing over you, to use that becomes a part of the practice. I want to back up a fair amount here and kind of look at this practice in a different context. And I'm even going to screen share. How about that? If I can pull it off. Let's see here now. Okay, you should now be seeing a sheet of paper that has the 7 factors of awakening and the Noble Eightfold Path on it. Do people see that? If you don't see that, let me know. Okay, looks like we're good. Is it big enough that it can be read? Okay. So in this group at one point, I'm not sure if anyone is here tonight that was involved in that, but we spent several months looking at the 7 factors of awakening. And these are them. The one that is the most fundamental and foundational is mindfulness itself, which then has an effect on all of these other aspects. So mindfulness, investigation, effort, joy, tranquility, concentration, equanimity. I mean, we could have a week-long retreat on any one of those and still not touch the depths of it. The third one is this one here. These various words are used by different teachers for that factor of awakening that has to do with energy and diligence and determination. And it shows up again in the Noble Eightfold Path, which of course is the 4th of the Noble Truths. Buddhists love numbers. The 6th one is right effort. There is an effort to be made. And how we make it and what we make it about becomes important. So I'm just wanting to put these things up there to say, you know, the Noble Eightfold Path and the 7 factors of awakening are very large, important teachings in Buddhism. So this determination or right effort is not a small potato. It comes up in these important ways. And I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing now. One of the traditional ways of looking at determination or diligence, and it's a way that Thich Nhat Hanh uses in his The Heart of the Buddhist Teaching, if you have that book and want to refer to it, that there are, he talks about seeds, or we can talk about tendencies. Seeds is a good word, I think. It works for me anyway. That there are 4 conditions, and that our determination has to do with these 4. That we want to cultivate positive seeds. We want to cultivate actions of mind, speech, and body that move us toward less suffering, that move us toward compassion, that move us toward deepening our understanding. So when something like compassion spontaneously arises, we want to notice that. We want to see it clearly and not just let it slide by. We want to give it some energy, some attention, be aware that compassion has arisen, and perhaps spend a little time with it. And if compassion is not present, that we can be aware of that, and that we have practices that we can do, Tonglen being one of them, for example, that can cultivate compassion and bring it up into the awareness of the moment. And it can be, we can give it some energy. We can give it some space and energy to be present there for us. And of course, there's patience and generosity and many other positive attributes around which we would like to both acknowledge when they're present. You have a spontaneous, generous idea outflowing, you act on it, and, well, stop a minute and be aware that that was there. Again, patience is one of my favorite. How do you cultivate that? We have our ways of cultivating that. So those are the positive seeds. On the other side of the fence, we have the negative seeds. And yes, we're talking about the world of duality here, positive and negative. These are things that we're looking at in the same world in which we look at compassion. And yes, we can see the emptiness of even these things, that even patience is empty of any substantive. It's a process. It isn't a thing. We always kind of go back to that. And ultimately, you can't grab a hold of it. Nonetheless, it's very helpful as we live in a world of duality to pay attention to these positive and negative seeds. So the negative ones that arise, I've already mentioned the idea there about it. You can be walking through a day and suddenly a moment of irritation arises, or a moment of envy arises, or a moment of anxiety arises. And the question, so now we have a negative seed that has spontaneously come forth. And how do we work with that? Now here's where the idea of exposure or even repudiation could come in to some degree. If we don't know it's there, if we can't see it, if we're not paying attention enough to realize that it has arisen, very often we react to it with our old habit energies. We never really have a chance to be able to, 3 objects, 3 poisons, 3 seeds of virtue. We don't have the opportunity to move into a way to make that a part of the practice and develop compassion from it. So that word exposure is such a good one, that we see it clearly that it's there. And if we do this often enough, sometimes things arise using that simple idea of too much cake again, there it is, and there is the aspect of not this time, not this time. Repudiating that grasping, not repudiating ourselves, but repudiating that grasping. Another one that can arise spontaneously is rants in our minds. Our least favorite politician appears on the scene, and our mind starts. Might even involve some kind of fantasy about what's going to happen. We might even play a starring role in that fantasy, who knows? And off we go in our fantasy or our rant. We know where it's going to go. It kind of feels good, you know. Yeah, I can just want to, yeah. So we get into it a bit. But ultimately, we know there's nothing positive that really comes from it. We recognize, I've played this tape before. I know where it's headed. And all it does is set up a barrier, a boundary, a division between me, and very often it goes further to all these other people who think like that person does. And now we've got two camps, and it starts building into the, you know, we got the red, and we got the blue, and we got the good guys, we got the bad guys, and you know that can just boil up just in a couple of seconds if we let it. And so there might come a time where you say, "Oh, geez, I just did that one half an hour ago. I need to do it again," and say, "Well, no, I don't think I will." So we can turn our attention to something as simple as our breath and do it long enough to really let that drift off on its own, which it will. Again, it's never a matter of pushing something out or wrestling with it. It's a matter of turning the attention to a different place. Another teaching on how to manage these things, these hindrances, the great desires that can lead us astray, the angers that lead us into conflict, and the feelings of hatred, wallowing around and not really paying attention, doubting ourselves, all these things that can arise. We've learned some things about how to manage those, and they include such things as the RAIN acronym. I think we're all familiar with that, but just to, you know, we recognize and accept. That's exposure. Oh yeah. And accept means really accept, not like, "Yeah, there it is again," but yeah, that arises in me. There it is. Just like my friend Millie Repudiation in the cave, you know, okay, you guys, you're not going anywhere. I'm not either. What are we going to do? Investigation can be a part of it. And this is an investigation without the intention to make something go away. I think once we are saying, okay, I'm going to investigate this so I can get rid of it, then we're not really accepting it, and we're not really investigating it. So we approach an investigation with curiosity and openness. And what we're approaching with curiosity and openness are things that are arising in us that we find to be problematic in one way or another. And a part of that process, the end there, is the aspect of recognizing this is not me. This is something that arises because of causes and conditions. It's there sometimes, it's not sometimes. It shifts and changes, never quite the same. It's not who I am. So there's this recognition, this non-identification that happens as a part of that. So when someone says repudiation, it can involve all of that. And then come these aspects that can be so sticky. Sometimes there are feelings of remorse, which can be very positive and very helpful. I did something that I regret doing. I'm going to make whatever amends I can make. I'm going to resolve not to do that again. I can see that clearly. I've given it its 5 minutes and I'm letting it go, other than my resolve. Or we might start feeling guilty. Oh, I did something bad. What I did was bad, and I'm going to think about it a lot. I'm going to bring it up from time to time. I'm going to run it past my brain. I'm going to fantasize about it. That was terrible. And then there's shame. Not only did I did something bad, but I'm bad. I'm a bad person. There's an aspect of me that stinks. And we can get all wound up in those things, and they can occupy our mind. They can lead to ruminations around things. They are hindrances, just like any other, that we can look at in the same way that we might look at our anger, we might look at our anxiety, fears. We look at our shame, our guilt in the same way. And they're hard to accept. They can be so painful. They can make our cheeks burn. They can be things that we, heaven, God forbid that somebody knows about this. They can really eat us up. But the same is there in terms of the need to accept, to really be present to. Again, exposure is a word that I see you. I've removed the clothing, so to speak. You're exposed. I see that shame. And I felt it before, and I know what it is. And sometimes we can really see the roots of it, sometimes not, but the roots are there, of course. To see it, to call it by its true name, to recognize that it is in us, to investigate how it is in the body and the mind. And again, to recognize that this is not who we are. As a part of that. In all of these, recognizing and working with these negative seeds that teachers are saying, there's a place for repudiation here. There's a place saying, I don't, no, I've had enough. At the same time that we are acknowledging that it is here. And our other practices can come in immediately when we do that. Let me breathe that in. I am not only going to accept it, I am going to breathe in what that suffering feels like, with whatever image might be there. And I'm going to be aware that this is not peculiar to me. That everybody has this. It feels so separate, and we can feel so alone with some of these kinds of feelings. I think especially shame and guilt. And we're not. Everybody has these things. And we can say in our minds, I would want to relieve you of that suffering. Let me take it from you. And let me give what I have. Specifically, as we can say, or images, whatever it might be, to lighten. But what kicked off this subject tonight again was the difficulty we sometimes have with the idea of repudiation, reproach, or as Alan Wallace says, abhorrence, for certain aspects that arise in us. But what I've been trying to sort of talk about here is that force of I'm done with this. I'm no longer willing to let this rule me. Is what powers the transformative practices that we can use. Once again, these things come around. This is one of the objects with the poison that can become the seed of virtue. We aren't dumping any part of us into the trash can. We're willing to be there with all of it and use these practices to allow these things to teach us. And allow us to transform. If they didn't arise, what would we do? If they don't arise, we have no way to transform them. Be grateful to everything, even your shame, as strange as that may sound. And the other aspect of this that I just want to touch on briefly, this has been a lot of serious stuff here. And Pema Chodron and others are constantly reminding us, relax, relax. You need to learn to take things lightly. And that relaxation is also an aspect of what the teachers teach us. But as we do this, we can see it in a way like a dream, right? We can see that all of this hard stuff, when we really look for it and look at it, hard to get a hold of. Has no real substance. Made of thoughts and feelings. Try to hold on to one of those, we know what happens. So the lightness comes from that aspect. That aspect of more of the emptiness aspect, the ultimate aspect. Let's see. In the 7 factors of awakening, that tranquility or relaxation of body and mind is the 5th one that's talked about. And it's a factor that should be brought to bear on all that we do. One of the slogans coming up is has to do with always relying on a joyful mind. I can remember the exact, I guess there are various wordings. And interestingly, that's in the section that we'll be getting to soon that has to do with how are you doing? Do you have a joyful mind that you can rely on? And if you aren't experiencing that, then what practices might help with that? So, yes, it's serious. Yes, we can take it lightly. Yes, there is suffering. Yes, we can be present to it. And we can be present to it in a way that allows transformation to occur. So I think I'll stop now and see what thoughts arise from others. I'm going to press the stop button.